As Obama pushes through his economic stimulus and considers nearly doubling the troop presence in Afghanistan, some critics question whether his policies will help pull the country out of economic crisis or propel the downward spiral. Refocusing on Afghanistan will mean spending even more than the $173 billion that has been spent there since 9/11, and it means returning to a place where Soviet soldiers were badly defeated after 9 years, this at a time when the country is already in a severe recession, which may turn into a full-blown depression. To discuss these issues, I spoke with Chris Hedges. He's the author of American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, and a Pulitzer-prize winning journalist. I asked him what he thought about Obama's first 2 weeks in office.
A disaster. To continue with this stimulus and financial bailout package, which, as Dennis Kucinich correctly points out, is the largest transference of wealth upwards in American history, is to exacerbate the problem, the financial crisis that we're in. There was a good article about this actually in the Village Voice that I would recommend. It was focused on AIG, but it's instructive as to, where this money went. I mean, the money's not being lent out because what happened is, as it became clear to financial investors that a lot of these mortgages were toxic, that they were worthless, they took out huge insurances. This is what AIG did. It sold gigantic insurance policies to big financial firms like Goldman Sachs that said, well, if all of these mortgages that you hold go belly up, we'll pay for it. And as they did go belly up, AIG ran out of money. They couldn't pay. So we bailed him out, and it's why Henry Paulson, who used to be the CEO of Goldman Sachs, got down on his knees literally before Nancy Pelosi and begged for the bailout of AIG because Goldman Sachs had $20 billion that they would have lost, and Goldman Sachs would have gone under. So you have this giant Ponzi scheme throughout the financial system, and we are dumping billions, hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars to essentially salvage financial firms who have virtually no impact in terms of the day-to-day economic reality of most Americans. And how are we doing this as this barrels forward? We are borrowing and we are printing money. And I covered the war in the former Yugoslavia. The war was caused not by ancient ethnic hatreds. It was caused by the economic meltdown of Yugoslavia. When you start printing money like that, you really raise the possibility of very serious inflation. So the fact that Obama would bring Larry Summers into the White House, the man who destroyed Glass-Steagall with the Financial Modernization Act of 1999, which essentially dismantled the regulatory mechanisms to help prevent that clear delineation between commercial and investment banks, the fact that he has brought in figures like Robert Gates, Hillary Clinton. I mean, these people were all wrong on the war in Iraq. The fact that Obama wants to transfer 30,000 troops to Afghanistan. I mean, if you think Iraq is bad, I can assure you Afghanistan is 100 times worse. You wonder if these people know anything about the Middle East or anything even about modern history. I mean, go back and read what the Red Army went through in Afghanistan over a 10-year period with 100,000 Soviet troops, about 160,000 Afghan soldiers, 15,000 dead, driven out, which of course contributed to the collapse of the Soviet Empire. So I don't see Obama questioning the status quo. I think he's well-intentioned. He's certainly intelligent. I mean, I was thrilled after the election because I never want to hear George Bush's voice again for the rest of my life. But I don't think we have a lot of time left. And I think that unless Obama begins to chart a radically new course, and he may be forced into that, let's hope he is, I can see potentially, and remember, because he is a person of color, there are powerful forces that can demonize him and paint him as the other. I think that people have look at him as a kind of savior. There's a frightening kind of childish delusion that somehow he's going to come in and make it all right. He isn't going to make it all right. This has been decades in the making. And I think that as the situation deteriorates, not only could people lose patience, but he could become a lightning rod for a lot of anger. So if we judge Obama by his appointments, with a few exceptions, I'm very, very worried and very disappointed.
Chris Hedges is the author of American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, and a Pulitzer-prize winning journalist. Make sure you tune in tomorrow when Hedges weighs in on why he thinks economic despair is the engine to totalitarianism. That's tomorrow on FSRN.
on Capitol Hill.
The Labor Department says unemployment figures could reach into the double digits. For Free Speech Radio News in Washington, D.C., I'm Karen Miller.
Plummeting unemployment rates mark this economic crisis around the nation, which is resulting in a political crisis on Capitol Hill as Democrats and the GOP debate the stimulus. Some analysts say that this economic despair is creating a vehicle towards totalitarianism, which was evident during the Great Depression. But during that depression, the nation had strong labor unions and a vibrant independent press. Without those traditional tools, what might we face in the coming years? Chris Hedges is the author of American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, and a Pulitzer-prize winning journalist. He's pessimistic about what he says is a growing movement towards fascism in the U.S.
We are certainly entering a period that will resemble in many ways the period of the Great Depression in the 1930s. And you saw in the 1930s a rise of radical right-wing forces. Father Coughlin, the Klan, huge industrialists, people like Henry Ford, Lindbergh, all sorts of figures openly embraced fascism. And many business publications, Fortune magazine in 1934, put Mussolini on the cover and praised the Italian dictator for defanging labor unions and empowering industrialists. But we had powerful counterforces within the society, first and foremost labor unions, which gave progressive democratic movements a kind of organizational base on the ground that we no longer lack. And we had an independent press. We did not have a corporatized press. I mean, it's about 6 or 8 corporations that now determine almost everything we see, hear, and read. The destruction of labor, the destruction of our socialist movement, you can, I think, with some legitimacy, credit Eugene Debs and the socialist movement for the New Deal. Roosevelt was seen as a moderating factor, not a radical figure in any way. And because the left in this country has thrown their lot in with the Democratic Party, which has betrayed the working class, thrust a knife in the back of the working class, it's lost political credibility, it's lost organizing power, and because we have a corporatized media, it's lost the ability to have a voice. So what I fear is that as things deteriorate, and look, an economic crisis always leads to a political crisis, we will find ourselves very ineffectual in dealing with very rapacious right-wing Christian forces that are physically located within these communities. And, of course, what does poverty and despair do? It destroys community, physically destroys community. And they have set up faux communities, authoritarian communities, where you can go and have a brunch and go to a service and go bowling and go to your AA meeting and have childcare. But you have to submit to the totalitarian structure, which is always white, male, pastors who are in direct contact with God and cannot be questioned. And it is this power structure that they impose on the family with the dominant male, the subservient woman, the obedient children. It's the power structure that they enforce within their own congregations, and it is the power structure that they would like to propagate within the community and the state itself. I worry that we are headed for a time of social, economic, and political dislocation, and the tools, we've stripped ourselves of the tools by which it's not completely our fault. I mean, the corporatization of media was a gift of Bill Clinton and the destruction of the FCC, but I think we just don't have the tools that we used to have to fight back. And when you get out in the street, as we saw in the Republican and Democratic conventions, what happens? The twin face, or the other side of the face of the corporate state, is the surveillance state. The capacity to ruthlessly crush dissent is greatly enhanced and very difficult to thwart.
Chris Hedges is the author of American Fascists, The Christian Right and the War on America, and a Pulitzer-prize winning author.